Hello viewers, today I'm going to be talking about Demon Souls. Now, Demon Souls was not the first game that I had played that was made by FromSoft. I had started playing FromSoft games with Armored Core 1 when I was a kid. And a few other RPGs. I had played King's Field 2. I had played Forever Kingdom and Evergrace on the PS2. I have a very long history, with FromSoft. I could play games that look better. I could play games that function better, but, for me, I've always enjoyed, FromSoft games, to be honest. They're somewhat unique, they're somewhat different than what I usually sort of, play on a daily basis, especially in regard to RPGs. Though I would have to say, my experience with Demon Souls has been the most memorable. Perhaps. When I reflect upon the time I've spent with these FromSoft games. And so, and even in terms of, well, not necessarily in terms of storyline, because I think in regard to the story and narrative, I would, in my opinion, Armored Core is far better. I would think, though, what I think was so good about Demon Souls is that I think the voice acting, this was peradventure the first game in the FromSoft that FromSoft had ever released that had voice acting this good. Now, FromSoft has basically, I think, most of their games are voice acted, to be honest. Especially on the PS1 with the Armored Core games. And so, as far as I know, most of their games are voice acted. Now, at least in regard to Armored Core, and there were a lot of Armored Core games, to be honest. But nonetheless, Demon Souls had, in my opinion, although the game was apparently unfinished, because of course we know, or at least some of us know, that there was supposed to be, the fifth Archstone? We were supposed to go to a particular land of ice giants or something such as that. But we could not go to it. And so there was a hope when the PS5 version had released that we would be able to, that would be added in, that somehow, or that maybe FromSoft would work with whoever was making the PS5 version of Demon Souls and, sort of do something to sort of give the fans, or rather I am not a fan personally, because I know what the word fan means. It means fanatic. I am just a sort of aficionado or connoisseur of these games, to be honest. But some of us had hoped that maybe we would get that fifth area. Maybe in the PS5 version they will release the Frost Giant DLC or whatever type of Archstone that was supposed to be, and sort of give us a finished experience, because we were very fortunate to get the remake. Some people can say nothing good about it. They complain about everything. As for me, I thought the remake was quite nice. I thought the music, being updated as it was very refreshing. However, it would have been nice if they would have simply completed the game. But I suppose FromSoft was already busy with a lot of things, and they were not willing to allow anything really, I don't know. But who knows? To be honest, maybe it would be good, maybe it would not be good if they decided to actually finish that sort of archstone with these giants. But, they did not do it. And I do not think that they will ever do it. But nonetheless, for some of us, such as myself, in regard to the Souls RPGs as a whole, people such as myself see Demon Souls as the most narratively consistent of the Souls games. And a person such as myself, I personally think that in Demon Souls, we had the most... Actually, in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, I think we had the most agency in terms of what we as a protagonist, as a player character, could do in the game. In other words, we had a lot of functions that we could take advantage of in the game. Can I say that about Dark Souls 1, 2, or at least Dark Souls 1 and 3, and Elden Ring, and even Bloodborne? No, I cannot. There are a lot of different things we could do in a game like Demon Souls with their world tendency setting, or their world tendency function. That was quite amazing, to be entirely honest. Now, when we talk about Demon Souls, we are talking about the beginning of one of these narratives, of this whole FromSoft type of Souls narrative. But I think I forgot to play the... Where is that intro? I forgot to play the... Oh no, I did play the intro, didn't I? Maybe you saw this, maybe you didn't. I remember when I had first bought Demon Souls. And of course you had the dragon flying overhead. This was so mysterious to me. Though I think the opening cinematic, was also very... this footage doesn't really have the dragon sort of carrying a body or whatever it is. But, very interesting. The opening cinematic for Demon Souls, although it really didn't add much to the story, they did have that sort of full motion video or CGI. I do not have it in the footage here for this podcast. I only have some gameplay that, has been pre-recorded from someone else, because I usually do not record for Demon Souls. I record footage for Elden Ring and Dark Souls and other games, but Demon Souls is an older game. Sure, I could get the PS3 emulator and, do it that way, or I could just do the PS5 gameplay, but as for myself, I really do favor the PS3 Demon Souls. And for the discussion that we are having about basically the origins of the whole Souls series and FromSoft, this really maketh a good deal of sense to just simply show the origins of all of this. Especially for some of you who have only played the PS5 version and who do not often look at, the older games, or simply not interested. This game provided a lot. World tendency is something that Dark Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne do not have. World Tendency was pretty amazing. Basically, what World Tendency is this little thing up here in the corner. And basically, it is white, or it becomes black. I think there's gray too. Is basically, you start off and it's not, it's basically gray. But if you do good things, such as basically not kill people, and there may be other ways to make the real world tendency white. But if you do evil things like kill NPC characters, you make that world tendency black. And basically, if you make that world tendency black, what happens is that that world tendency affects how the game responds to you. In other words, you can get different items. NPC characters who were once friendly will attack you. There are different enemies in the game. Okay, the game basically becomes harder if you behave in a manner that is evil. And so it may not seem like it, but that actually does give the player agency. That means that you can affect the world in some way. Now, that was pretty amazing at the time, and it was one of the things that made, Demon Souls sort of unique, and it, Demon Souls became a cult classic. To be entirely honest, and it was sort of what spurred on the popularity of FromSoft. Apparently there was a big, there was this type of idea, there was this idea that basically Demon Souls is not really going to amount to much. It was an unfinished game, is what Miyazaki says, and, there were a few people who knew about it. The people who knew about it were, it was just something they would play over and over again. And, back then it was pretty, you really could not find a game like it, to be honest. And so, ever since then, I have noticed that I have not really had the same experience with any game since. Not Dark Souls, not even Bloodborne, and certainly not Elden Ring. And it seems as though Elden Ring especially, which I talk about on the channel, there's just such a big open space. It is so beautiful. The landscape is it is scenic. I have played quite a few open world games, but I can say, in my humble opinion, Elden Ring has the most beautiful open world in terms of colors, and some of you may not understand sort of the history behind Elden Ring's design in terms of just art style. That area Limgrave was pretty amazing to me, and it is funny, I could not remember the name Limgrave in the last video that I did about the Black Knives. I don't know. But anyhow, basically, that area Limgrave with its beautiful sort of autumn trees, the brown leaves and the green sky. A lot of you may not realize this, but I do. And it is that whole aesthetic of green sky and this sort of autumn look and autumn atmosphere and autumn scenery, it was copied from a game that FromSoft had previously released called Evergrace. Evergrace was quite a beautiful game. It was on the PS2. I think that it was released fairly early on in the PS2's life cycle, as far as I know. I'm not particularly sure. Evergrace was quite... It was not that much fun, in my opinion. basically, it is a lot like Dark Souls in that, and even Demon Souls in that a lot of what you do is basically trying to circle around the enemies and sort of attack them from behind, not necessarily doing a backstab because you didn't have the animation for backstabs, but basically you would basically walk around the enemy and you would attack them with your sword, or if you were playing with the other character, I believe she had a bow. You had some magic in the game, but it had a very beautiful aesthetic. Now, it was a PS2 game during the time, but the art style was very unique. Now, during the early part of the life cycle of that game, or rather the development of that game, I do believe there was a decision to actually have an autumn forest look with blue skies, but for whatever reason, in Evergrace they had developed, the game was developed, there was sort of green clouds and there was sort of a green sky. So when you look at Limgrave and you look at the green sky and the autumn trees, that really does fit in with the aesthetic of Evergrace. So one can see that FromSoft, as they have been making RPGs, they have actually reused ideas. And they were very good ideas, to be entirely honest. When you look at Evergrace, and you look at Limgrave, I mean, the comparison is basically with the first area, where you have the green sky and the beautiful autumn trees. It is so easy to see the resemblance. It is so easy to see the similarities of those areas. And so Limgrave is, in my opinion, and I'm sure arguably, Limgrave is one of probably the most beautiful area in Elden Ring. Now, it is really a shame that we as players could not do more in Limgrave, and that Limgrave was so limited in terms of story content. The interesting thing that I learned from the cut content is that apparently our hub area was supposed to be in Limgrave, just like in Majula. Now, Majula in Dark Souls 2 was an excellent idea, because Majula looks so beautiful, it looks so inviting. It did not matter what we were doing in Dark Souls 2. When we came back to Majula, it was a very calming atmosphere, and it would have been very interesting if our hub area was an area that we could reach on foot. And apparently that area was basically, I think it was by the Stormhill Shack or something such as that, and basically that was supposed to be the hub area. And basically we weren't supposed to be able to, there was no sort of round table hold sort of teleport option. The cut content apparently shows that, the blacksmith was supposed to be by that Stormhill Shack, and there was sort of an idea to create our hub area to be more like Majula from Dark Souls 2. And I think when you look at Elden Ring, when you look at Demon Souls, you see a similarity in these games in that they are far more accessible than Dark Souls 1, 2, or at least 1 and 3. A lot of people, for whatever reason, love Dark Souls 1 and 3 and really, think quite a lot of them. And I do see the appeal in Dark Souls 1 and 3. However, I derived more replay value from 2 because there was simply more to do in 2, a wider range of weapons in Dark Souls 2. In regard to Demon Souls, I think the story has a great deal of appeal and is very, how should I say, accessible. In other words, the story is mysterious, and more mysterious than I would think a lot of people realize, to be honest. This story, just like all of the other FromSoft RPGs, has a good deal of symbolism. That is a given, but that is a given in most, especially sort of, RPGs in general, and even some action and adventure games. We can see symbolism and cultural influences, religious and philosophical influences that are very interesting to look at. Though I would say, in my opinion, and as far as I know, and as far as I have seen, none of those narratives really show any type of, how should I say, sort of extensive type of really complex sort of philosophical, framework or narrative. I mean, basically there are some basic philosophical concepts presented in these games, and there's some very basic symbolism oftentimes, to be honest. However, for Demon Souls, things were presented in a very out in the open way. Okay? I mean, basically you had the magic people, and they were called magicians. They had their little wands. You had, the worshippers of God, and they call the sort of deity God. So it is very plainly presented. Now, some of you know that I have done a good deal of work in regard to talking about the story, talking about the symbolism, talking about the narrative and the narrative elements and the concepts in Demon Souls. It can be quite enjoyable, but I have to say, some of those blogs are very long, so I may very well just do podcasts like this where I talk about Demon Souls sometimes. But as I was saying, this game is, in my opinion, very... I almost forgot what I was talking about. I basically have. Because I sort of took a tangent. But basically this story is... it is very... very simple but compelling, sort of due to that. And the hub area for this game, the Nexus, it is so beautiful. And when you compare that to Round Table Hold is boring. And maybe some of you will agree with this, maybe some of you will not agree with this, but Round Table Hold, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most boring areas. And so, when I look at the cut content for Elden Ring, it always makes me kind of sick. And it makes me feel as though these people who made Elden Ring, they rushed. People can say what they would like. I have gotten on some people's bad side. There was a person who has not yet responded to a comment that I had basically sent in one of my Elden Ring podcast videos, in which I said that this game feels unfinished. And this person, had watched my podcast where I was talking about Elden Ring, and, he talked about a few different subjects that I talked about in the podcast, but it was interesting and sort of funny. It was sort of humorous that he began the podcast and he basically said, he basically began his comment and he said, oh, well, I do agree this game can be somewhat obtuse because of the lack of NPCs, but he said, oh, but I think it's marvelous, or I think it's brilliant, or, and it is interesting, it is sort of humorous that when we, as players, sort of make commentary about the game that is negative in any sense, a lot of people who play the game, they feel the need to respond to it, but every time they respond to it, they have to say, oh, well, I think the game's brilliant. I think it is marvelous. I think it is a masterpiece. And you cannot really have an honest discussion, that is sort of, how should I say, a sort of non-biased discussion when you have people who are players, but they're fans. it is a different experience when you engage with fans. Okay? Because when you engage in honest discussions about your favorite video games with fans, they have to begin the discussion by saying, oh, the game is brilliant, the game is marvelous, the game is, oh, it's this, but I think it's just so great. And I'm not going to say who the person is. I left a very substantive comment in response to them, but they have yet to respond. They said they were going to basically post on my Elden Ring forum. I left them a very substantive response, and basically we're discussing Elden Ring. It was a podcast where basically I did like what I'm doing now, an impromptu podcast where I talk about different things, the narrative, the concepts, and the game. But he never responded back, and I think it is somewhat interesting. I have talked about the cut content before. Okay? I think the cut content hurt Elden Ring more than the cut content hurt Demon Souls. In other words, both games, every FromSoft game has cut content. But I think even with Elden Ring's lack of NPCs, I can deal with that. But it feels very disconnected from the world to go to Round Table Hold, and there you have to talk to the NPCs. You have to talk to the NPCs there, and in Majula and Dark Souls 2, you just went there. In Demon Souls, the Nexus seemed so mysterious, and it seemed like this otherworldly place that you could teleport to, but it did not seem, at least to me, it did not seem so out of place, because even though it was a hub world that you teleported to, what was so interesting about the Nexus is that it was so big. It sort of justified the teleportation, alright? To the Round Table Hold, it's just a few rooms. You just walk into a few rooms, and then you have this weird guy, the Dung Eater. He moves into one room, and basically it's just a bunch of nasty, rotting corpses, and this weird guy just sitting there. Okay? And that to me was not so very enjoyable. I like a hub world that I go to, and basically sort of, how should I say, I like to feel comfortable, because this is the only place in the game where you are not at combat. So when I talk about a hub, this area that's, such as the Nexus, or Round Table Hold, or Majula, or Firelink Shrine, one of the most important things about such an area is that it feels comfortable. I did not think that Round Table Hold felt that comfortable. It was a very boring area. And for me, Round Table Hold was a big disappointment. And learning that they could have had the hub area in that beautiful area called Limgrave, I thought, wow, this game would have been so much more enjoyable if I could just go to Limgrave and that was my hub world. And I could just think about it, people, how amazing it would be to do a no teleportation sort of playthrough. Let us say you could just go to Limgrave and the hub area was right there, and you could talk to the blacksmith and everybody who you're sort of engaged with, and you could sort of experience that everybody's journeying on their own, taking their own journey, the NPCs. And everybody at some point, for the NPCs, they just sort of return to Limgrave and this little hub area up by the Stormhill Shack, or whatever you called it. Basically, the hub area was supposed to be right there, apparently, from what I saw from cut content. Now this is what you're seeing now is a little, oh no, he's not doing, this gameplay does not have that sheet where you take the souls and never mind. There's a sheet in this game where you can basically sort of get more souls if you do certain things, but the sheet is not in this gameplay footage. But nonetheless, I have to say that it would have been so amazing if you could just go to Limgrave and your hub area was right there, and you know, because I personally do not like using the fast travel. I think this is such a beautiful game. It really defeats the whole purpose of having such a beautiful landscape and area when you have to fast travel everywhere. And so it was a big disappointment to me that we had to use fast travel to reach Round Table Hold. I really do not like that. And basically, America, you know, not America, but what is her name? Melina touches you, and she sort of puts you in a trance, and you engage in some astral projection, and you go out of your body into this type of dream-like Round Table Hold. I did not like that. Personally, I would have liked something more comforting, something more real. Now, I understand the narrative implication of it, but it is so sort of loosely connected to the story that I cannot really appreciate it. I cannot really appreciate that, to be honest. But, you know, when I think about that, you know, that implementation of the fast travel, I compare it to the old Dark Souls 1, where for most of the game you did not have fast travel, and the experience really felt rough. But, you know, and not necessarily that it was as difficult as Elden Ring, but you felt more or less that you were journeying. And sure, the game was not as big, it was not as huge, but, you know, for me, I really felt more satisfied with my exploration through Dark Souls, because for most of the game we did not have fast travel. Now, another game that I remember in which we did not have fast travel was the old Dragon's Dogma. You know, the first one. I know the second Dragon's Dogma is going to be released at some point, but that was a pretty controversial game, because if you bought the first installment of Dragon's Dogma, not the DLC sort of expansion pack, which, you know, they used to have sort of whole type video game expansions where basically they would release, you know, the whole game and DLC on the same disc, and I think that was the type of deal that Dragon's Dogma had, and those were kind of fun. That happened with Dragon Age as well. The first Dragon Age, when Dragon Age used to be good, with Dragon Age Origins, and basically enemies and your as well as you as a character and your sort of party members all sort of functioned at the same speed, okay? Which, you know, that's a whole nother thing to talk about. And I may do a podcast about Dragon Age Origins and how much I liked just how fair that gameplay was in comparison to basically Dragon Age 2. I may do a podcast about that. I do not play as many video games as I used to. I do not play as many new games as I used to. Most of the stuff I pirate, to be honest. But I would have to say that for me, you know, I really liked Dragon's Dogma because you had to basically walk everywhere. You had to travel through that big, beautiful world, and you got to see all of it, and you got to enjoy it. Now, it would have been so nice in Elden Ring if you really did get to do that, but I think that inclusion of Round Table Hold as a place you had to teleport to, you know, instead of a place such as Majula, where with Majula you could just walk to Majula. You could take a stop in Majula, and you could just, you know, enjoy Majula for what it was. But Round Table Hold is a boring place. The Nexus is a beautiful place. So, for me, a lot of my experience in Demon Souls that I can remember, some of my most memorable experiences were in the Nexus. And I remember a lot of those conversations with Sage Freke, Saint Urbain, and even characters like the Worshipper of God. And it was just something that, you know, the voice acting was done well. It was just something that was more memorable to me. Now in Elden Ring, you have excellent voice acting. However, it just is not as memorable to me, and it is not as it is not as much of an enjoyable experience to me as Demon Souls was. Now, what I was also going to talk about is the fact that, yes, years ago, years and years and years ago, especially on the PS3, you used to, because they used to have whole packs, sometimes. And so Dragon's Dogma did this thing where basically, I think it was called the Bitter Black Isle DLC, the Bitter Black Isle expansion. And basically, they had new content, new hairstyles, and all types of things. And you bought the whole disc. For me, I bought a PlayStation 3, disc of the Bitter Black Isle DLC, and basically it was an expansion pack. I forget what the expansion pack was called, but it was all on the same disc. And so I think they had corrected a lot of glitches, and of course now we have patches. Okay, on the PS3 back then, in those days, they did not have as many patches, and so a lot of times you would basically have a game released, and you would play the base game, and sometimes they would release a whole expansion and basically release the game over again, which was very interesting. Alright, so that would happen sometimes. But the experience of traveling, the experience of basically being able to just travel through an area, not relying on fast travel, but just experience it, that was quite enjoyable. Now, I can do that, somewhat through in a game like Black Desert. Black Desert reminds me a lot of Dragon's Dogma, to be honest, but Black Desert is an MMO, and you can never really, in my opinion, it is very hard to sort of enjoy an MMO in a sort of leisurely way, because you're always competing. You are always competing in an MMO. And an RPG, sort of a single-player RPG, is a game where, for the most part, I like to just relax. I like to just, take my time and experience it. In an MMORPG, especially one like Black Desert, where people are just attacking you and just trying to kill you, your character, it is not as relaxing. So I do not often play MMORPGs. But I would have to say, Elden Ring is huge. It's massive. But for me, it's too massive. And so I recognize in that game I have so little agency. The cut content really leaves so much to be desired. More to be desired than any of these FromSoft games has ever left to be desired. Just in terms of cut content. I mean, in terms of factions, type of covenants, so to speak, interesting interactions that a person cannot experience, in Elden Ring. But if they were there, if they were in the game, a lot of us would have enjoyed those experiences. So some people may disagree with me when I say, yeah, Elden Ring is less because of that cut content. And in my opinion, a lot of that cut content is so complete. Some people have already implemented that cut content back into their games, by modding. Because the voice files are there, the interactions can be recreated. Just about all of the materials are there in the game. And so what this means is that, in my opinion, people may disagree. What this means is that they had every capability to put, that cut content into the game. But the reason they did not put that cut content into the game is because FromSoft was rushing to release that game. And they knew that they did not need to provide a really full-bodied story, or really a full-bodied world with just more NPCs and more interactions, because they knew FromSoft players would accept anything. In other words, they knew that these FromSoft players like it when we have so little story in our games to begin with. So why would we care to give FromSoft players more NPCs and more interactions, and even more voice acting that they paid for? Now, in game design, or at least in the industry, in the video game industry, speed is everything. And so they want to make good on, good. They want to release the product, make good on the investments that have been made in their company, and there are deadlines. And so I have heard some things about the FromSoft workplace, about how rough it is, about some of the sexual harassment to the women, to the female workers. Apparently most of the people who work there are men, and some of the women are not treated so very well. They release games fast. FromSoft release games fast. For a small burgeoning company, they release games fast. Of course, now, basically they have been absorbed into Namco Bandai, and basically Bandai has basically, a good deal of control over them, and I would think that is also another reason why the release, well, to be honest, and I will be honest, FromSoft has always been a company that has released games fast, and what is so very interesting about FromSoft is that they sort of work like a mercenary, believe it or not, in the sense that they will basically work with any type of publisher. They will develop games for Activision, just like Sekiro. As far as I know, Sekiro was developed by Activision. Sometimes they'll work with Sony, and they'll do a Sony exclusive, like Demon's Souls or Bloodborne. And FromSoft is quite a wide-ranged company. They do not just simply work with one partner. They'll work with whoever they can to get the game out. But I think, from what I saw with Elden Ring, as big as that game is, and let me say this, the game is quite big, and considering how fast Elden Ring was made and how fast that game released, and you really take into account its size, that game is really lacking some essential things in it. But I think that the FromSoft sort of player base is so used to receiving less. They're so used to receiving less in regard to NPC interaction, which, to be honest, let me say this. Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, Bloodborne, and Demon's Souls have a good deal of NPCs relative to the sizes of those games. Some of you will understand what I'm saying. And in order to understand that, you have to play a good deal of RPGs to recognize just how consistent and balanced the amount of NPCs in this game is to sort of deliver a very, how should I say, interesting and enjoyable experience. Okay? In other words, there were, we only have about 4 areas that we go to in Demon's Souls. All right, but for the most part, we have people to talk to in every area, and the conversations that we have are quite interesting. Now, in Elden Ring, the game is huge. The game is huge in Elden Ring, but when you take into consideration just how many people you have to talk to, the length of the conversations, as well as some other factors, it really seems underwhelming when you compare it to Demon's Souls, even Dark Souls 1. For a game as big as Elden Ring, where you basically, sure, you get fast travel everywhere, but even if you fast travel everywhere, imagine how it would be to just meet some people in some dungeons every now and then, or some, because there were so many dungeons, okay, in Elden Ring, and so many different areas in Elden Ring. But the problem is that we go stretches and stretches through the game, and we do not even talk to any new NPCs. Not to mention the fact that most of the NPCs in Elden Ring die. Now, you know, that was not the case in Demon Souls because, you know, basically in the hub area, you have some NPCs that are not going to die unless you kill them. And in Demon Souls, you could attack and kill a lot of NPCs. You know, as far as I know, there were basically only 2 NPCs that you could not kill. You compare that to Elden Ring, where you have a lot of NPCs you cannot kill. You cannot kill Ronnie, even if you do not like Ronnie and you just decide, I do not want to do Ronnie's quest line, so I will kill Ronnie. You cannot kill Ronnie. And so, is that an improvement in gameplay? No, it is not, because basically, we have less choice in Elden Ring. It may be big, but we have less choice in Elden Ring. There's less agency in Elden Ring. The world is less reactive in Elden Ring. Elden Ring, if I had to talk about which game I think is basically the least of all of these FromSoft games, what I'm talking about, Bloodborne, Demon Souls, you know, any Dark Souls game, and I had to compare it to Elden Ring, I would say that in all of the games before Elden Ring, I would basically say the world is more reactive. Basically, the world responds, you know, to our actions. We have somewhat more agency, though I would have to say we really do not have very much agency in Dark Souls 3, but Demon Souls for certain, we had a lot of agency in the uses of that world tendency system. I cannot say that about Elden Ring. So Demon Souls has a lot of charm. It really does. For me, you know, playing a lot of the new games, you know, like Elden Ring, I mean, they leave so much to be desired. Basically, the only game that I am looking forward to is Dragon's Dogma 2. Dragon Age, I don't know if they're going to call it Dragon Age 4 or if they're going to call it Dragon Age whatever. I don't really know what the new Dragon Age game is going to be titled. I forgot, because people often do not talk about it. Apparently, the Dragon Age development is pretty terrible right now, but I think basically when Dragon Age 2 was released, that was basically the end of Dragon Age. The game basically became easy, and not necessarily easy, but the functionality of the game was really changed. I think Dragon Age Origins had a very good battle system, a very good combat system. I think the story was far more compelling than it is, you know, in 2 and Inquisition. But I think it's called Dragon Age Trespasser or something. No, not Trespasser. Trespasser was a DLC. Excuse me. Do not mind, you know, my misremembering of certain facts. But yes, there's a whole history that could be talked about regarding that development. But I'm gonna try to just basically talk about Demon Souls for this podcast. Demon Souls was, in terms of combat, I mean, it was, personally I thought it was quite good. I enjoyed Demon Souls more than I did Dark Souls 1 combat. And to a certain extent, even Dark Souls 2 combat. You had a lot of sort of MP or mana or whatever you would call it. You had items that could refill it, and you could sort of use as much magic as you wanted to, which is what I do in Elden Ring. I use Sheet Engine because, and that is another thing to talk about, all of these old Souls games, even Dark Souls 3, and a lot of us have recognized that they did not have input reading. And some people say, oh, it's not input reading, it's something else, there's another name for it. But it still is input reading. It works like input reading. When we do something, the computer responds by basically, just sort of responding just with lightning speed, and it just seems quite ridiculous. But none of these games used to, basically they seemed, although they were not as hard, they were more, in my opinion, more satisfying. Some of the things, when you try to play fair in Elden Ring, and you do not sort of adhere to the meta, things become very difficult. I like to do what you may call role plays, you may call it theme plays, but let's say you're playing a bow build, or you're playing a magic build, or what have you, and you're using very niche type spells that are usually not very effective, like Beast Claw, or or you're just using a bow. Okay, the input reading just gets ridiculous. I will put it that way. People have different opinions about that, I do know. But anyhow, I just think Elden Ring as a whole, if it had something like World Tendency, if it had, if it really decided, if the developers really decided to not implement fast travel as much as they did, and decided to do some type of alternative where basically they would have tried to rely less on it, I think that would have been a better decision. But I know that most modern games do not sort of adhere to a lot of the same standards that, a game like, Dark Souls 1 used to. And it is kind of interesting saying that, because it is true that Demon Souls they had fast travel to an extent. But the amount of sites of grace in Elden Ring is sort of really ridiculous, in my opinion. Because basically, the whole game is just filled with sites of grace, and I think the reason that is the case is because there is so little to do in that big, huge world. It was almost as though the developers knew there's not much to do in all of these areas, and so we're going to have sites of grace just about everywhere. And basically, you can fast travel a few footsteps, and here's another site of grace. But especially when you get to the gatefront area where you meet Melina in Elden Ring, it really seemeth to be quite ridiculous that you have two sites of grace that are so close to one another. It really seems quite ridiculous. You can take basically a few steps, and there you are, it's another site of grace. Okay? And of course in Dark Souls 3, there were plenty of bonfires. So, I know that does not account to difficulty, because of course the enemies are harder, but still, it sort of defeats the purpose of a lot of this exploration. It defeats the purpose of a lot of this exploration, and it makes me think, why should I explore and look at things when there are so many sites of grace I can just teleport to? There's almost no incentive to sort of, use your horse more. After you find the area, you can teleport to it. So why would you even want to go and look around or have that experience? So, there's a lot in the game, but I cannot really enjoy it. From a scenery perspective, from, as a person who really likes the beauty of the game. Now, although Demon Souls was smaller, an area like the Nexus was just absolutely beautiful. I have some very good memories of it. It was something that, I would say this is probably the best hub area that I have ever experienced in a game. And furthermore, I would say that, to be entirely honest, FromSoft could have made something like this. They could have given us a similar experience, if not just simply given, just made the hub area in the overworld in a place like Limgrave. But that is a shame, in my opinion. That is quite the shame. But this was pretty crazy. I mean, you would go to places like even this area, the Shrine of Storms, and as far as I know, there were a few NPCs that would attack you if you... I think there was one NPC that would attack you if you had basically got a black world tendency, and you can affect the world in that way. But how can you affect the world in Elden Ring? In Elden Ring, when I think about what you do, you basically just kill. That really seems to be it. And it's almost as though there's nothing more to it. It's just, okay, you have a bunch of enemies. Most of those enemies are what you call HP sponges. Most of them do not even drop many runes. And so the only way to get a lot of runes fairly, if you can call it fair, would be just basically to go to, that area where you can fight all of those Albinarchs. That was it. When I started playing Elden Ring, I wanted to level up my character. And even now, it is still hard to sort of, invest in stats properly, because if you do not invest a good deal of points into vigor, you have a hard time, and enemies will just kill you in 1 or 2 hits. And it feels worse in Elden Ring than it ever did in any of these other previous FromSoft games to me, because in the previous FromSoft games, even in Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, I think the combat was more balanced. You didn't have someone literally reading your inputs to such an extent where they respawn instantaneously when you drink your little flask of Crimson Tears. And it's so ridiculous how easily that happens. That's why, even when I do not play with Sheet Engine, I do not even use the flask of Crimson Tears, because apparently they do not read your inputs if you just use a heal spell, a heal invocation. But if you do drink one of the flasks of Crimson Tears, they read your input. And basically, you'll drink it and you'll get hit most of the time. And it is so cheap that, I mean, I really cannot come up with any other word for it but that it is cheap. A lot of people disagree with that. They say, oh, you can't say that about FromSoft, you can't say that about Elden Ring. But I've never really had that experience with the other FromSoft games. Never really have had that experience. Not that I really worry that much about, the input reading in general, because I play differently in such a way that, I sort of alter the difficulty as I like it with Sheet Engine, now that I play on PC most of the time. And people can say, oh, you're casual. Whatever, man. I'm not even concerned about those stupid sort of criticisms, because it's almost as though, okay, wow, you use, you like role playing and theme playing more than you do challenge runs. But to be entirely honest, I just do not care. I mean, there was a time when I used to play these FromSoft games like that where I want to see how difficult I can make it for myself. But to me, that's just not fun anymore. Now I want to sort of invest my time in understanding the story. I want to sort of play a role, and I sort of want to see, okay, this is supposed to be a role-playing game. Let's see if it really is a role-playing game. And it basically is not. And so basically all I can do is sort of play with a theme in mind. And so I basically, at this point, I try to have as much fun as I can. But that is somewhat difficult for me. And so, you know, when you're fighting bosses who have unlimited stamina and can read your inputs, their stamina does not go down. They do not have an FP bar, and so that never used to be a problem in Dark Souls 3 or 1 or even 2, because, I mean, you didn't have all of this. I mean, the input reading is ridiculous. I remember when Black Flame Freed from Dark Souls 3 used to be considered hard. Black Flame Freed is basically nothing when you consider the challenges that you faced in Elden Ring. Not to mention the fact that many of these challenges, they just when you're facing enemies like the Godskin duo or whatnot, and it was ridiculous that they had to change how multiple enemies functioned, because I thought that was just a lazy type of way to deal with it. Basically, if you're fighting the Godskin duo now, they do not attack you at the same time. Basically, one will attack you, the other enemy will stand back, and it is kind of ridiculous. When you're fighting them with a mimic tier, you basically trivialize these fights. And so for those who did like the challenge of fighting enemies like the Godskin duo, where they were both functioning independently and they were both attacking you with full force, and you had to rely upon your spirit summon, which, you know, makes a good deal of sense. Because if you have a spirit summon, okay, it makes a lot of sense that you would use spirit summons for enemies like the Godskin duo. I can understand that. But people said, you know, that's too hard. And it is just all of it together. It's the multiple enemies, it's the multiple bosses, the input reading, and a lot of other things that make people frustrated. Now, I myself would not care as much and wish if that difficulty sort of came back now, because, you know, I use Sheet Engine, and I sort of give myself unlimited FP so that I can sort of, you know, basically fight in the way that I want to, while at the same time having to face the challenges, you know, of having to dodge. And when I cut the HUD off, I cannot see how much health and stamina I have, so it puts me in a situation where I have to sort of depend upon my reflexes and gauge how much health I still have, because I can't see the health bar. And there are a lot of things I like to do like that. So, you know, lowering the difficulty, you know, in the way that FromSoft did it, I think that really did not help very much. I think that was sort of contrived, a sort of contrived way to deal with it. But I think the input reading that was implemented in the game was sort of a lazy way to address the combat, because in Dark Souls, you know, the enemies still had, for the most part, fairly telegraphed attacks. And when you took advantage of those telegraphed attacks, you could get a few hits in. In this game, in Elden Ring, you have to rely on weapon arts. You have to rely on spells. And what happens when you lose all of your FP? When you lose all of your FP, you know, and you do not have to use weapon arts, but basically if you want to win, you know, if you do not want to struggle, you're going to have to use weapon arts, and you're going to have to use, you know, spells and incantations to a lesser extent, which, you know, often includes a lot of spamming. and that spamming is very boring and is not so dynamic. And whereas in a lot of games, like, or at least in some of these past few games like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, we would dodge, and attack and dodge and attack, and there was a rhythm to it. That rhythm is sort of ruined in Elden Ring because basically you're looking to stagger your enemy as fast as possible, and this is not a good game for that. It worked in Final Fantasy 13, 13-2, and as well as, wow, it's just a shame. Just look at how many priest type. I mean, this game was full of dead priest corpses. Now, for those of you who do not know, in Demon Souls there are a lot of dead bodies, but they use a template called the priest body, and basically, the priest is a character that you can start with. He's related to the temple of God, or whatever you would call it. And so, most of us already know that they're using a Christian archetype, and that, that really shows a strong anti-Christian bias. You see so many priest corpses, and it's not just in this area, because of course we know this is the magic area, so of course they would sort of be against priests, but because of the sort of Dungeons and Dragons conflict between faith and intelligence. But you can find priest corpses just about everywhere, and it's just, I think about and I wonder, wow, you open up 3 Iron Maidens and you find 3 priest corpses. I mean, to me, that's symbolism. That's really making it obvious that there's this type of anti-Christian bias where you just really want to make a point of showing us the dead bodies of priests. And so that is interesting too. And of course, I play these games, but I'm not a fan of them. I myself, as a Christian, I sort of realize and notice these things, and I think, wow, why are there so many priest corpses? Wow, look. Basically, every one of these bodies is going to be a priest corpse. Basically, every one of those bodies is a priest corpse. Oh, that's crazy. And of course, you have the Dregling bodies, or the prisoner bodies, but just about every adventurer body down here is a priest corpse. And they did have other templates for different corpses, but they chose to have priest corpses everywhere. That is pretty incredible to me. Okay, that's a knight corpse, but most of the corpses are priest corpse. And they literally say, when you talk to these people in the Nexus, the disciple of God and the priest of God, or the acolyte of God, or whatnot, they all say they're worshippers of God or whatnot. They have different dialogue. So many of us already know that is supposed to be their little Christian faction, their little archetypical God faction, their little faith faction. But yeah, that is in a sense, that's sort of this type of degradation of the image of a priest. And I tell you, I play these games, but just looking at that and knowing what I know, and knowing how media portrays Christians on a daily basis, and just how often the portrayal is negative, that is pretty amazing. And I do know a lot about Japanese culture as well. I know a lot about some of their nationalistic religions, and some of the fraternal lodges, and some of the Western occult aspects of Japanese culture, as well as Shinto nationalism that was practiced during World War II, heavily influenced by Nazism and theosophy. Oh my goodness, I could talk a long time about those subjects. But anyhow, goodness, that sort of threw me off. But I was talking about gameplay, and I was talking about just how it has changed. And excuse me. since these previous FromSoft installments. I had to clear my throat. But yes, I mean, these FromSoft games have changed so much, especially these Souls games. I do know that Armored Core is going to come out soon, but I am actually not really even planning to play Armored Core. The robots have never really been to my interest, but basically this game is all about religion. Is all about some very basic philosophical ideas. What they present is the sort of struggle between, the magicians and the priests and the worshippers of God and the people who work with demons. That was what it was about. And in this game, they really sort of made it very clear to us. Apparently, Miyazaki was influenced by Berserk. You can see it, but there are a lot of unique things in this game, too. Now, Berserk is something I would like to do videos on my channel about Berserk. I have watched the anime, but I have not really read very far into the manga. I've watched the anime, but I've not read very far into the manga. That all seems very interesting. In my opinion, because I think that Berserk is I think there are some very interesting concepts that are presented in Berserk, and there's a lot of things that just about all these narratives have to do with God in some way or the other. I think that narrative is very straightforward in Demon's Souls. It is in Elden Ring with the Erd Tree and Marika and the Greater Will. Basically in Elden Ring, God is called the Greater Will. In Demon's Souls, God is called God. In Dark Souls, God is basically considered to be the fire. Okay, in a sense, basically. And it's all very interesting. And, I could talk about some of the further implications of that, but to be honest, I think that ultimately there's always a conflict in these games. Whether you're talking about Sage Freke and Urbain, and he wants you, the player character, to really take the power of demons, and in Elden Ring things are sort of different because basically, a person who we may equate to Freke in Elden Ring is Ranni, because Ranni, she wants that Age of Stars at all costs, and she really has no love for the Golden Order, for Marika, her mother, or really anything having to do with the Greater Will. Now, as a character, I think that Freke is a better character in regard to narrative. Freke is very upfront about what he wants to do. He wants to work, towards his own end. He wants power. This idea that Ranni is some type of altruistic character is really stupid. And I do not even like how it is written, because even now Ranni is not a well-written character. We really still do not know what her chief motivations are. We know that she wants this Age of Stars and that she was willing to plot against, basically her whole family in the narrative. But, nonetheless, as to why the Age of Stars is so important, other than, just, lunar worship and her being, the lunar princess, we really do not really understand much about her personal motivations. It is almost presented in this sort of altruistic sense, but that to me does not make for a very good story, because, how can you be altruistic and how can you be working for the good of other people when you're willing to literally plot against, people on the mass scale, cause chaos, and at the same time you want to say, oh, well, my order is going to be better than the golden order. Well, how so? I mean, we really do not know how that order is going to be better, but basically she says some different things, especially if you read the Japanese translation. Whether you read the Japanese or English translation, to me, whether some parts were mistranslated or not, I still get the same message from it, which is basically that she is basically against the greater will. It would be better if, basically people did not have faith, and all of this type of, basically their type of, perspective, which is basically against, what may be called blind faith. But blind faith is a very vague term, because in a sense, when you're believing in things that you cannot prove or that you cannot really sort of physically validate, when you're dealing with matters of belief, belief is always somewhat blind, especially when you're just sort of intuitively believing. So if you're believing, if you have intuition, if you are believing something, that you cannot physically prove, that faith is always blind to an extent. So, maybe it could be said that Ronnie and her peers and her family is sort of atheistic. I still do not really believe that, because it is a type of faith that, I mean, the Knox and all of these people related to the moon have their own type of faith. So, America is talking about the end of blind faith, and, there's different things that, at times I do take into account. But I think that basically the same concepts that were in Demon Souls are being presented in every game. The magicians are always against the clerics. It's that old Dungeons and Dragons conflict between the paladins and the clerics and the magicians and the wizards. Okay, and I think, the description of those stats as being faith and intelligence sort of reveals the idea and the conflict. But I did like characters like Freke. Freke was just honestly saying it. He said, mankind could become better if they worked with demons. That was basically what Freke was saying. And so, and even he himself was afraid of really doing it. So I think Freke was a more full-bodied character, a more full-bodied wizard character, who had in my opinion, a better, more compelling story than Ronnie does, or any of the, basically most, if not all, of the characters in Elden Ring. I mean, Yuria in Demon Souls was also an interesting character who sort of was working with the demons, the archdemons, or she wanted to get the demon souls, and in the end, she recognized that, she was going to do so much evil by doing this, or that she had a recognition that what she was doing was wrong, and she had sort of recognized that what she was doing was wrong. And for me, a character like that, who sort of recognizes the gravity of their actions, is more interesting to me than a character like Ronnie. Ronnie has no regrets about plotting against everyone. She will not even tell us that she was really responsible for that plot of Black Knives, as far as I know. Now, we learn from Rajier, but that was very interesting. Now, regarding the more faith-based characters, you had Brother Corrin, but Brother Corrin to me, I do not know. I think all of these Demon Souls quest lines were just, I really enjoyed them more. And not necessarily because you did more in the story, but because you had that place you could go called what is it called? The Nexus. Most of the narrative happened in the Nexus. That's where most of the narrative happened. And so because most of the narrative happened in the Nexus, it was a very memorable area, and a lot of those conversations were quite substantive. Now, a lot of them were about different things. They may even seem inconsequential, even when you're talking to what was the acolyte of God and the disciple of God. You had a few different characters there who were faith-based, and they were on the right side of the Nexus. And you had characters who were magicians, and you had about 3 of them, on the left side of the Nexus. And they all had their little... They tried to do something similar in Dark Souls 3. Miyazaki tried to sort of recapture the feeling and the atmosphere of Demon Souls, but he could not do it. I know he wanted to do it, because I know that Demon Souls has been the game that Miyazaki has been trying to make ever since it was released on PS3. I just know it. Because basically, that game was never finished. Demon Souls was never finished. It was supposed to have one more area in it, and I think ever since then, as I have played the later installments, and especially Dark Souls 3, I've noticed that basically a lot of the aesthetics and a lot of the things, that you sort of experience, they seem to take a lot after. They seem to take a lot from Demon Souls, but it's never quite like Demon Souls. It's still not as good, I would say. It's still not as enjoyable, I would say. And, I think, the sort of system in Dark Souls 3 where they have sort of the thrones, and it looks like the Archstones, and you have people sitting down in certain areas around Firelink's Shrine, it's just not as good. And basically, Firelink's Shrine in Dark Souls 3 is like a gloomy Nexus. I mean, but the Nexus still, it seems so much more inviting. The color scheme seems more inviting, and it seems more relaxing. And so, for me, Firelink's Shrine in Dark Souls 3, it does not seem even as good as Firelink's Shrine in Dark Souls 1, because in Dark Souls 1, it's the color scheme. It's the beautiful grass, it's the green, it's the inviting colors, it's the, a hub area should be comfortable, and I think that Miyazaki has sort of went away from making a comfortable hub area. Now, he was not responsible for the hub area in Dark Souls 2, as far as I know, because apparently he did not work on that game. But I would say that the hub area from Bloodborne was sort of good, but I mean, it's better than the one in Elden Ring, and probably the one in Dark Souls 3 as well. Though I do not like the fact that you basically can only talk to the doll. But at the same time, the doll had some very interesting dialogue that sort of made it worth it, to be honest. I think that Bloodborne was still very interesting because of the dialogue that you had with the doll. But as far as Demon Souls, just the Nexus itself, I do not think that any FromSoft game has really captured the experience of just having a good hub area. I think that the Nexus was the best hub area ever made in a Souls game. I think... Actually, I would say Majula probably is, but from a perspective of just what I remember, and I've played all of these Souls games, I would say, based on memory, I think I remember the interactions I had in the Nexus more. And I think that the NPCs were very memorable. Like, as we can see on here, Yurt the Silent Chief, he was very memorable. He was a conniving character, and if you know, for those of you who know about him, if you open that cage, you know, he would just turn on you. I mean, and that was pretty amazing. But you see, I think in every one of these Souls games, they try to recapture the experiences. And it is just not the same. You know, we see that how you release Yurt the Silent Chief from a cage, and then in Dark Souls 1, you release, what was it, Lautrec from a cage, and, you know, they put patches in just about every game, and it's just, to me, it's just not as good. It's just not as good as it used to be. I think when they first did it, when they first had these very novel interactions, in Demon Souls, they were very fresh and they were very interesting. And ever since then, I think a lot of these concepts have really suffered, in my opinion, because there's a lack of new ideas. Now, what makes Demon Souls memorable to me is that it was a game in which I saw a lot of new things. And those things have been reused to such an extent that, I mean, it's just a lot of my experiences in Elden Ring and even Dark Souls 3 especially, they're very boring. They're very boring. I think, you know, Elden Ring was far less enjoyable than Bloodborne, because Bloodborne was something new, Bloodborne was something different. And Bloodborne's narrative was very unique compared to, you know, the Dark Souls narrative. Even though a lot of the same concepts were used, it did enough new things to really make it just a better experience. Now, Elden Ring just seems as though it is big, but it is more quantity than quality. In other words, when you look at all of the cut content that had implemented so many new ideas, and when you look at how much those new ideas that could have been implemented could have affected that game for the better, and you realize that it has been completely cut out, it really sort of makes me really enjoy the game a lot less, because I sort of realized that, you know, Elden Ring could have been a very fresh and a very exciting experience, you know. Despite my issues with the gameplay, the storyline itself could have given me a great deal more enjoyment, and the replay value could have been better because I would have wanted to replay the story. But with a massive game like Elden Ring, I really do think that there was a need for a lot more NPCs. There was a need for a better hub area, and that hub area sort of makes the game to an extent. Which is weird for me to say, but very true. It is weird for me to say that the hub area in some wise sort of makes the game. And that may seem really ridiculous, but it does. The Nexus was such an innovation. It was such an innovation in Demon Souls, that, you know, I cannot really even I can't really even overestimate that. I cannot sort of say enough about it, about just how big and beautiful it was, and the fact that you could go on the bottom floor and you had NPCs on both sides who were fairly close together, and they had their own little relations with one another. You know, and it just seemed as though you had more of the interactions were more meaningful back then. I will put it that way. And even with simple things like the storage, they never did it again. And in Dark Souls, in Bloodborne, or Elden Ring, Stockpile Thomas, you had to go to an NPC and you had to talk to the NPC, and the NPC would basically take your extra items, and you could have conversations with Stockpile Thomas. You had this type of relationship with Stockpile Thomas. You even had a quest with Stockpile Thomas, and that adds a narrative dimension. That adds more liveliness to the story. That adds more liveliness to the narrative. Some people think, oh, well, it has no gameplay function. Why can't I just go to the bonfire and just, put my the items that you have in stock in the box, in the storage box? And that really does defeat the purpose of character interaction, because the character interaction is supposed to make the game more, how should I say it? It is supposed to make the game more interesting and more exciting. But that sort of defeats the purpose when you can just go to the bonfire and just put all of your items in a little storage box in the bonfire. So it is not as enjoyable as some people think it is, when you're just taking all these NPC interactions out of the game. And that is what they did for Dark Souls, for the Dark Souls series. And they tried to bring it back. They tried to bring it back in Bloodborne, and they tried to bring it back in Dark Souls 3, in a sense, or at least some of it back. In other words, in order to level up, you have to, instead of going to a bonfire, and they even did that for Dark Souls 2, where they sort of noticed that the interactions that you have with the Fire Maiden, or or do they call them the Firekeeper, or even the interactions that you had with the Maiden in Black were kind of important, and so you should not be able to just go to a bonfire and level up without talking to them, because that interactions with NPC characters gives the player a certain degree of comfort. So just thinking about not being able to interact with certain characters, and sort of taking that aspect out of the game little by little in every installment, it really makes the game less enjoyable. And I think a lot of these people at FromSoft have they do not realize that they have made the games less enjoyable by making the game so, as Mucho Stretchy said, obtuse, with this sort of lack of NPCs. But not only the lack of NPCs, also by making the interactions with what NPCs are in the game less frequent, what has happened is that basically the game is not a game that's very comforting. Now, some people would say, why do you have to be comforted in a game like this? Because you're fighting all of the time. And for a game like this, it is nice to think that you can sort of take a breath and just enjoy it for what it is. Enjoy the NPCs, enjoy the voice acting. What I saw from the cut content from Elden Ring is that there was a lot of good voice acting that was just cut out. And you as a player cannot access it, you cannot listen to it. All of that voice acting, all of those quest lines have been taken out of the game, and therefore it really takes away from the atmosphere. It takes away from the experience. It takes away from the enjoyment that we would derive from this game. Some people, as I said, may disagree, but that's just the truth. a lot of us can really see that even the conversations you have in an RPG are very important. And, you know, I think at this point it has become a misnomer to even call these Souls games RPGs, because, and I think if you were to consider them RPGs, I would say the best one from an RPG perspective is probably, you know, of course people have different definitions of an RPG, but for me, when I think of an RPG, I've always thought of about more of the narrative side. For me, when I look for an RPG, I look for the narrative, whether that's something like Final Fantasy or, you know, Baldur's Gate or anything like that. If you're not talking to people, that really, it's hard for me to take the game seriously. It is hard for me to really even know what the character is fighting for without many conversations, or even know what to even really play the game for. Now, that may seem weird that a person needs motivation to play, but to be honest, if the game is just simply fighting, and not actually you know, based upon character interactions, and things just sort of happen in a very restricted fashion where you just go from one battle to the next. You know, here's a bonfire, here's an archstone. That seems very boring. Now, for me, I felt Demon Souls provided me, for as small as the game was, a good deal of meaningful character interaction. I really do. I take these games and sort of make a judgment upon them based on their relative size. In other words, if the game is small like Demon Souls, for as small as the game is, they have a good deal of NPCs and character interaction. Okay? The sad thing about Elden Ring is that most of the sort of NPC interaction that you have, you know, the majority of it is with the spirit NPCs, and they do not even have vocal sort of voice lines. They do not even have audio. You have to read what the spirits are saying in that game. But there are a few major NPCs. They are very hard to find, especially if you played the game when it did not have a patch. They were extremely difficult to find, and even with the patches. For example, a good example of that is Maleficent, or whatever her name is, the woman with the red hair who does not have an arm. You know, the woman you give a prosthetic arm to. She was in places that really, you know, there was no story or narrative purpose for why she was in the places that she was in. And so she would just be in different areas, and you could find her summon sign, but there was no real interaction. And when I think about summon signs in Elden Ring, you know, there were only a few summon signs for bosses. Most of the time, the game wanted you to use spirit summons. Now, I remember in Dark Souls 1, when you could first summon Solaire, that was a pretty amazing thing, because Solaire basically has a conversation with the character. And he says, hey, you know, why don't we help each other? And you can summon Solaire multiple times throughout Dark Souls. You can even summon Lautrec. And it was a pretty amazing experience to have that interaction. And in Dark Souls 2, although there was not very much of a narrative function behind a lot of those summon signs that you found. They were still there, and you could still sort of use your imagination and sort of think about different adventurers who you are coming across on your journey, who who can help you, in battles and so forth. But when I reflect on my experience with Elden Ring, it's just, there is so much to be desired. And personally, when I play the game now, I did not even use spirit summons. I sort of tailor my own experience with Sheet Engine. I sort of do theme plays or role plays. I sort of emphasize the beauty of the game by cutting the HUD off, the health gauges, and the stamina gauge and the FP gauge, and I do not like those to be on the screen, just so I can see how beautiful the game is, because to me the greatest thing about Elden Ring is the beauty of the game. They took that aesthetic that they had in Evergrace a long time ago on the PS2 and just really they really advanced it into what it was in Limgrave, and after they had gotten that right, they had basically made that game so beautiful that to me that is the most enjoyable thing about it, to be honest. But I would have to say, in regard to just interacting with characters and sort of experiencing a journey with different NPCs that you could summon and fight with, that you could sort of side with, even Dark Souls 3 had more interaction. I mean, there were different characters that you would meet in the world, and they would go to Firelink's Shrine, and you would sort of do different quests with them. What was so good about Firelink's Shrine in Dark Souls 3, even though I have my problems with Firelink's Shrine, was that the area that you had as a hub area was bigger than Round Table Hold. You could go outside of Firelink's Shrine in Dark Souls 3. You could have interactions with characters like Patches when you got to a certain area. And I mean, maybe some of you remember what it was, maybe some of you do not. Maybe I should not spoil it for those of you who've not played Dark Souls 3, but even Firelink's Shrine in Dark Souls 3 was quite big. I mean, with the graveyard and so forth, it was a very big hub area, and it was quite enjoyable. It was quite interesting. Now, for Round Table Hold is so small it's pathetic. And I keep talking about the hub area, and I feel like I have to, because honestly, that hub area affects the experience so much. But in Dark Souls 3, you used to meet people like, Cornix, the Swamp Pyromancer. You even had his sort of his student, his pupil, you could even summon his pupil as a summon sign, as a spirit summon, or whatever you would call it. And so that was interesting. But, when you think about the story implications of summon signs in Elden Ring, most of them you cannot even find, and most of the bosses do not have any summon sign whatsoever. And the weird thing about Elden Ring is that it seemeth as though the summon signs are in random areas. If you look at where the summon signs are, they seem to be in, some weird areas. You had, what was it, Targoff? He is a summon sign, but no one knows who Targoff is. Targoff as an NPC is just, I do not know what to say about that. It just seems like an excuse to put the bull goat armor in the game, and what is a bull goat? Who can say? To me, it seems like some type of satanic type of thing where basically, oh, the goat, is always there to help you, and what is that even supposed to mean? Now, I myself know the symbolism of the goat, and I know the symbolism of the bull, and the bull's connection to the Canaanite god Baal, and the pagan connection of, bulls and goats. There's a whole history behind those two images, those two symbols, so those animalistic symbols. So the whole bull goat idea, it seems really random. It seems like a sort of contrived, purposeful thing just to give glory to the goat, give glory to the bull. Okay, what is the purpose to the wider story? Basically nothing. I mean, you have this man in a set of armor that has basically goat horns on it. And, as to why, I mean, it looks derpy. I mean, it's a man with, compare that with Havel the Rock. Now, Havel the Rock in Dark Souls, whether you're talking, and of course, it was, he was a character in Dark Souls 1, but the armor was in Dark Souls 1 through 3. In every Dark Souls game, you had a Havel armor set. Now, that Havel armor set was iconic. In Dark Souls 1, the big thing was to put on the wood grain ring or something like that, or the dark wood grain ring, or whatever it was called, and basically do cartwheels with the Havel armor. But nonetheless, whether you did that or not, the Havel armor was iconic. The Havel armor was pretty amazing because, it looked cool, it was interesting, there was a story behind it, there was a narrative purpose behind it. And Targov, who is Targov? Who is the bull goat? Basically, the sort of homage, or sort of paying homage to basically the devil, basically Satan, the goat. So, that's all I can think of. Now, if I'm wrong, if someone knows what the possible symbolism or purpose for putting bull goat armor in the game and not really providing any type of narrative purpose behind it, hey, please enlighten me as to why, this bull goat Targov is so significant, because he has no real function in the story. But you can summon him, but he has no real function in the story. Now, it is true that in Dark Souls 2 you could summon a lot of people, but in Dark Souls 2 you had a lot of different summon signs. And even some of those summon signs had a purpose, because when you were in that poison area where you had a boss who sort of was in a bath of poison, and you had to fight her, she was like a snake woman. If you summoned the NPC character to fight with you, they would basically point you in the direction to burn the windmill down. And that was pretty amazing. That was pretty interesting as a function. Okay, but there's nothing like that in Elden Ring. There is that thing where Melina can do a little interesting thing where if she dies in the fight against Morgott, she can sort of do a last invocation to heal you. But, there are so few bosses that you can summon individual NPC characters for. And even if, you can sort of summon them, they basically have no real, the narrative purpose for those characters is basically nothing. Okay? And that's the truth. It's not to say that Dark Souls has had the best storyline. The best Dark Souls story was Dark Souls 1, in my opinion. But even so, when you compare Elden Ring to the last three, Dark Souls games, summon signs had more of a purpose. And they had more of a function, and there was more logic to summon signs. And sort of the various worlds of each sort of participant, in the story. Like Soler said that, there was an idea, there was a basis for, invasions and cooperative play. And the framework was there. That framework is absent from Elden Ring. And even in regard to a lot of the hollowing. Elden Ring does have hollowing, basically. But in order to understand it, you basically, and it's not even really explained that well. The undead in Elden Ring are not really explained that well. And many of us who have played the last 3 Dark Souls games, we already know where it comes from. And of course, the whole idea even comes from just Demon Souls itself. They had a similar idea of soul-starved men, where in other words, if you did not get souls, you would basically lose your mind. So in a sense, in Demon Souls, the soul is equated with the mind. And if you do not have souls, you will go mad, you will go insane. Now, this was a very interesting area, the Valley of Defilement, which many people did not like to play through, but the story here is absolutely amazing in terms of its implications. Now, basically the menfolk here are obsessed with Astraea, and you have one woman who you can meet who is a merchant. And the merchant basically is saying that, all of the men, they basically went crazy for this woman Astraea. Now, Astraea, or Astraea, whatever her name is a name of a particular star goddess in the Greek mythology. And basically, here, what is happening in the Valley of Defilement is basically the men are sort of giving souls to Astraea, and they go so far as even to take the children, and give them to Astraea to take their souls. Okay, now that has some other implications. But seriously, if you look at this story, you will see that is how raw and really cruel this whole story is. And a lot of people I have noticed a lot of people have not figured it out, because they want to say, oh, Astraea, she is such a good person, and she is... No, Astraea is evil. Astraea, basically the whole idea of Astraea is that, oh, she has a pure heart, but no, she's really wicked. Okay? And basically, if you take her soul, you can get the Death Blight spell. And basically, it's this idea that she thinks that killing the people of the Valley of Defilement is doing them a mercy. And she goes even so far as to kill the children. And she thinks that she is doing something good by destroying these people. And the men are so obsessed with her that they will kidnap children. Okay? And if you talk to the female merchant, she will say that these men tried to kidnap her child. And what they're doing is basically, they believe that the blessing that Astraea is giving is death. So Astraea will take the souls of basically the men and the children, and anyone that she can get her hands on. So basically, she thinks by killing them, she is doing them the greatest mercy that she can. Now, you can live in this area because they have architecture, they have a culture, they have built a life for themselves. The woman who you talk to has herbs that can really cure a plague, but the idea is here in the Valley of Defilement is that, Astraea has basically this twisted notion that the greatest mercy that she can give to the poor is death. And so, that is what she is carrying out in the Valley of Defilement. And it is a storyline that many of you have not considered or heard before, but it is indeed. If you look into it enough, you will realize that that is indeed what is taking place. And you may disagree right now, but take a look at the story again, and you will realize that it is really that dark. Now, you compare this story to any story in the Dark Souls series or Elden Ring, you will not find a story this hidden. It is not necessarily hidden. It's just that the whole idea of it is so horrible that a lot of people like to ignore it, and they like to think that Maiden Astraea really isn't killing the children, but she is. She is. And for those of you who've seen the little kid or child corpses, they're called filthy ones. People used to call them plague babies, and the whole idea was that, she's, the plague babies are, she did not drown the plague babies, or she did not kill or take the souls of the plague babies, but she really did. They're called filthy ones. And the female merchant, her name is Filthy Woman. Now, the reason I know that basically the enemies that you face when you face the Maiden Astraea boss are called Filthy Ones is because I have the official game guide where they give you the official name, and basically what it said was that they were filthy ones. So you have the Filthy Woman, who is the merchant, and the filthy ones are basically the children of the Valley of Defilement that the Maiden Astraea is killing, because she thinks that she is doing something good by killing them. And so there are a lot of people who do not want to admit that, but when you think about what Maiden Astraea is doing, she really is an evil person, because the Filthy Woman is still living in the Valley of Defilement. She has lotuses that can heal poison and plague, and even bleeding, as far as I know. So, they can live, and they have been living here in the Valley of Defilement. But for Maiden Astraea, she believes that the people of the Valley of Defilement are just worthless. Okay, so she does not really care about them. She just wants to kill them. And the Maiden Astraea is really just an evil person who is not pure. She does not have a pure heart at all. But rather her heart is sort of like, she's absolutely convinced that by killing the people she's doing a service, and that is what she really believes. So Maiden Astraea is, ironically enough, the most evil character in this whole game. Some of you who have played Demon's Souls, you're probably thinking, that can't be true. Maiden Astraea is beautiful. She's pretty. There were a lot of simps back then, and still are today, and they will still say, Maiden Astraea, God betrayed Maiden Astraea and all of this stuff. She's just, no, Maiden Astraea is killing basically everyone, that she can in the Valley of Defilement. That is the story. I mean, a lot of you people can ignore it. The Filthy Woman is just crazy. No, the Filthy Woman is telling you the truth. And I know what Miyazaki and his development team did. They did a very good story here, because basically the idea is that you, as far as I know, will basically think, this is, she's pretty, she can't be evil. She can't be a character who is doing something wrong, but she is. She is doing something. She's the most evil character in this whole game. Excuse me. But, that is the truth. I mean, how much more evil can you be And you only get the plague water. You see, as you walk through the swamp, it's all just poison. It's all just poison swamp. When you get to Maiden Astraea, that is when you get to step in the water that causes plague. And Maiden Astraea is just sitting right there in that water. And as you go around her, literally you have filthy ones, which are basically kids that she has killed. And basically, just like the filthy woman is saying, oh, these men tried to kidnap my kid. They're obsessed with this crazy woman. And who's Maiden Astraea, as we know. And so, basically, what we are dealing with when we walk in the swamp is poison water. When we get down to Maiden Astraea, the water plagues you. And that is how you know the water by Maiden Astraea is special. It is almost as though Maiden Astraea is so evil and that her intentions are just so vile that I think as a representation in this narrative, that really is sort of taking a gameplay element and really, sort of adding it into the narrative. So the idea is that Maiden Astraea is so evil that even the water around her is just much more poisonous than just the poison swamp. Some of you people will disagree. If you think that this is some type of some type of contrivance that I'm making, or that I am sort of going too far, and that I have something against Maiden Astraea, or I'm just saying something against your favorite waifu in Demon Souls, no. Read the art stones for the Valley of Defilement, and you will recognize that what I'm saying, as far as I am concerned, and you in all likelihood will be convinced, is true. I am serious. And that is a very interesting dynamic to this Valley of Defilement story, that Maiden Astraea is that evil that she is killing children. But no, I am serious. I mean, I think a lot of people have not really come to terms with that. A lot of people try to ignore that facet of the story, and I think it really is, there are not a lot of video games or even media which really include the deaths of children and just an evil woman who is literally sort of, sort of a woman who is that evil. I will put it that way in media, because it really is a sensitive subject. But in Demon Souls, that was really happening. I mean, some people may want to say, oh, she wasn't killing the children. She was just... I mean, people come up with all types of excuses. People say that somehow, Maiden Astraea was showing mercy by ending these people's lives. How? I do not know. That really does not make any sense to me. But there are quite a lot of individuals who will make excuses for Maiden Astraea and say, oh, Maiden Astraea is so good, she could not have been doing evil things. I mean, how people come to these conclusions, I do not know. I simply do not know. But, because when I first played this game, I did not really recognize, just how evil Maiden Astraea was either. And it took me some time to think about it, because when I got the official game guide and I read that who everyone was calling the Plague Babies were really called, because Plague Babies was what people used to call these little baby characters that were around Maiden Astraea. When I read they were called filthy ones, and that the filthy woman was basically just she was talking about how these people were trying to kidnap her child. What that indicates to me is that, obviously, these people are kidnapping children. It is so obvious to understand. They're kidnapping the children. And they're giving them to Maiden Astraea, and she is taking their souls. And what happens when you take the souls of people in this game? They go crazy. So literally they're just in the swamp. They're in this nasty, place, and they attack you because it's just like the soul-starved men in, throughout the game. Maiden Astraea is a demon. She has taken their souls and made them crazy. So Maiden Astraea is particularly evil. This is why when you play Demon Souls consecutive times, you like me, you may be like me and you may have no mercy on her at all because she is just so evil. Okay, she is really evil. And basically, Garl Vinland, the person who is her knight, he is just a simp. He is a mega simp. Basically, I think he's wearing dark silver armor, and that has some implications in being related to the moon. And of course, the moon is usually considered to be sinister or sinistral in regard to the sort of attributes of spears. In other words, the sun is associated with goodness, and the moon is associated with evil. And so, Maiden Astraea is supposed to be the sixth saint, and she really is evil because she is killing children. So, yeah, some of you may agree with that, some of you may not agree with that. I mean, that is probably one of the most interesting, stories in all of Demon Souls. Okay, so, if you did not really consider that, you have learned something new. And for whatever reason, people just hate the filthy woman. But in regard to Latria was really interesting. And even today, it seemed to be quite scary to me. Latria had some really interesting sounds. And I will also say, the old Souls games used to have this thing where there was no music unless you fought a boss. And because of that, the experience was more atmospheric. It was very interesting to play a game that was that silent. And I think it was a lot more relaxing. Now, in Elden Ring, there's always this ambient music. Okay, and in Latria there were so many sounds. There were very disturbing sounds. I can say the same thing about Bloodborne, and I think that is one of the reasons why Bloodborne was such an interesting game, was because of the sounds and the silence. The silence and the sounds in Bloodborne were quite incredible. And even now, when I look at the setting and the atmosphere here in Latria, it was disturbing. It was very, very, when you compare this to some of the dungeons even in Elden Ring, all you have to do is update the graphics for this. And I think this would be a lot better than most of what we experience even in Elden Ring. Of course, there was the PS5 version of Demon Souls, and that looked quite good, to be entirely honest. But, this holds up, as an experience quite well. I mean, the gameplay of Demon Souls is so-so, but I think the silence, in Demon Souls and the Souls games was, that was an iconic thing that sadly has been lost. And I think after Sekiro, when music was being added to these games, because Sekiro was basically, it is basically like Dark Souls, is basically like Bloodborne in a sense, except the mechanics are quite a good deal different. But they started to add ambient music. They started to add music in the game besides that of the bosses, and so it was implemented in Elden Ring. I never have really been a proponent of it because I used to like these games silent. When you entered the boss room, that was sort of a big experience. and none of you will understand what I'm talking about unless you've experienced these previous Souls games, but maybe some of you understand what I'm saying. But it was very creepy. It was very weird, going through this area, and it was disturbing. It was very, and here you can sort of understand more or less the influence that, Miyazaki or whoever worked on this really sort of derived from Berserk. Because Berserk had a lot of disgusting things. They had a lot of really disturbing, satanic, evil-looking things that really were scary and were nasty and would make your skin crawl. And I think, that has been done in Dark Souls 3. That has been done to, to a lesser extent even in Dark Souls 1. But, I think Latria, still one of the most disturbing. You basically had this man, the old monk, who was trying to make demons, and I think that directly comes from Berserk. If you have ever read Berserk and the particular, parts of the manga where you have some crazy person trying to make demons, it really is disgusting, to be honest. I have to say that none of that seems at all really coherent or sort of good in any sense, but I can see where this comes from now, having read Berserk. I can see where, or at least enough of the manga to know what ideas he's deriving from Berserk, because there's a similar thing in Berserk where there's literally the creation of demons, and Berserk is full of a lot of weird, what I would call, by the sort of older definition, satanic. I'm not talking about the Church of Satan, no, I'm talking about the general dictionary term of satanic or diabolic. Something that we, may term that. Now, you'll have to do your own research in terms of definitions, because some people, just simply do not have any sort of sense or conceptions of evil anymore. Excuse me. Some people, and I have talked to a lot of people like that nowadays, or at least dealt with a good deal of people like that on YouTube and some forums, who really seem to be to have some very interesting ideas about good and evil, and basically do not believe in the contrast or in any sense of duality regarding those things. And they do not even really have much of a notion of morality in general, which, is interesting, but, I suppose there have always been people like that. I'm not in that category, to be entirely honest. But the sense I'm using the word satanic in a very antiquated sense. Alright? And you will have to be the judge of it yourself. But Latria was just really disturbing. I do not think in Elden Ring there's a place like Latria that is as disturbing as Latria. Not at all. Not even in Bloodborne, to me, because Latria just seems like such a mysterious place, and it just seems so I think one of the most disturbing parts about Latria is that you have very narrow walkways and that you could fall off very easily. And the design of that area is quite terrifying because not only is it dark, and not only are the enemies very disturbing looking, I mean, they basically look like gargoyles. And basically he is taking the prisoners and he's turning them into demons. And he's using their flesh and doing all types of evil experiments on them. What is so very disturbing about this area is that you can fall off at any time. You can fall off at any time. It's very, you have to fight on walkways in which, if you just take one wrong step, you'll fall off. So you cannot roll very often. It is not as though the area itself is very difficult, but it is a very disturbing area. And I have to say, just looking at the color palette for this area, it's very green, very dark, very yellowish. I have a lot of, I see this area, it brings up a lot of memories in the past when I was playing this game. I just had no idea about what it was. It was just such a mysterious game to me. Now, the boss that you faced when you reached the end of this area was quite weird, but at the same time, somewhat, it's the Man-Eater. And the interesting thing about Demon Souls is that the second boss you face oftentimes is the hardest, except for basically one area. And that was, what area was that? That was the main area in Boletaria. Okay? But when you're facing, the Man-Eater was one of the hardest bosses, because there were two of them. And I remember I used to have such a difficult time fighting those enemies. People had different strategies for fighting them, but I remember the first time I was fighting the Man-Eaters rather, I would usually fall off. And it was just a really terrifying experience for me, in my younger days, fighting the Man-Eater. And that was just, even looking at the whole area as a whole, it is just absolutely terrifying. Even today, just thinking about a tower like this and just looking at Elden Ring, although it's big, although it's beautiful, there is a lot to be desired in regard to just this, innovation, I suppose you might say, or even just an awe-inspiring area. The Demon Souls areas were very good. They were very well done, and they just really, they just gave me the creeps. They really did. Those areas were terrifying, to be entirely honest. When I think back about it. Now the boss you came to was the old monk, and the whole idea behind the old monk was that the old monk was basically depraved, and so there's a story that goes along with the old monk boss fight was pretty easy. I could talk about some things regarding color symbolism. I have a whole video about it. The audio is not so good, because back then I really did not know how to use sound programs, but I have a blog that you can read about the old monk, about demon souls, symbolism, and all types of different things regarding that, NPCs and storylines and narratives. But it was sort of an anticlimactic boss fight, and most of the boss fights in Demon Souls, when you get to the third boss, it is extremely easy in most of these areas. Actually, I'd say every area, really, just about. Now, I mean, this is where this iconic headpiece came from. And it seems like in basically every Dark Souls game, they do a rendition of this headpiece. I'm not so sure they did. Well, they did do something similar in Elden Ring. I think it's the mushroom head or something, but to be honest, they reuse so many ideas throughout so many of these games. I think there are some similarities between the idea of the old monk and the Frenzied Flame storyline. There are actually a lot of similarities between the old monk, the idea of the sort of robe that sort of drives you insane and sort of absorbs your mind, and the old monk, and even, or rather the Frenzied Flame, and even the old one in general, who's the main antagonist in this game. I wrote a lot about that, to be honest, and I may redo the videos that I've done about Demon Souls one day. I may create a separate forum where I just sort of present my information about Demon Souls, the Demon Souls narratives and NPCs and different things that I have sort of found in this game. But that will have to be at another time. As it so happens, I do not often play this game, but I think that I will be doing more podcasts about it. If I find anything that is of note. And I really think, to be honest, I may have found just about everything that I've really been interested in talking about, because the storyline itself is not that confusing. However, I think I may be talking more about Yulia, or was it Yuria, that character, because she is also very interesting, but I do not think that I have really sort of investigated her as a character as much as I would have liked. So that may be one thing that I may do. I have looked at Freke as a character, but I have not looked at the implications of Yuria as a character. I've even looked at let me think. I've looked at that organization that was her name, Mephistopheles belongs to in Europe. And I have really investigated those implications of them basically coming to Boletaria to kill all of the remaining individuals who are alive here. That has some interesting implications, especially considering that Mephistopheles gives us the Talisman of Beasts, and she considers it a great honor to basically give us this talisman. And basically all of these games sort of, they have different religions in the narrative, and so the religion of Mephistopheles centers around the Old One rather than God. And so once again, just as we encounter in Elden Ring, basically the Old One is a representative of chaos, or peradventure even chaos itself, and God basically represents order. In Dark Souls, the darkness represents chaos, and the fire represents order. In Elden Ring, the two fingers represent fingers represent order, and the three fingers sort of represent chaos. So basically, in Elden Ring, there is causality and regression. And so all of these games, whether you're talking about Demon Souls, Dark Souls, or Elden Ring, they all have to do with order and chaos. Alright? Every single one of these games have to talk about order and chaos. Whether you are talking about it in terms of a fraternal sort of brotherhood of the mystery schools, in regard to their sort of adage, or maxim, or whatever you might call it, in which they say ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos, and their belief that, in order to establish order, you have to have chaos, and you basically will burn something down and build it back up. Which, to be entirely honest, that seemeth as though is a very, that seemeth as though it is the very idea of fraternal lodges. Some of you may not understand what I'm saying. I'm being very careful with my words because they're particular occult brotherhoods, and I will not say what name that they often, take. It's the Freemason, so to speak. There's some French, words that really have to do with the origin of who I'm talking about, or at least their name. It has more to do, some people have said it means sons of light, or whatnot, but anyhow, there are particular fraternal organizations that believe in order to create order, you have to create chaos, and they like to sort of promote their ideas, even though their ideas are at variance with the majority of people who just live in the world from day to day. It does not really benefit the ordinary average person to have chaos, but for kings and queens and leaders and rulers and particular organizations, it makes a good deal of sense to create chaos, because even though the majority of people will be affected, it will work to your benefit, because you will be able to basically take advantage of a situation and gain things for yourself, and even gain a position for yourself, and even to some extent, be able to create your own order out of chaos. Peradventure, some of you have heard about a particular politician named Rahm Emanuel, an individual with dual citizenship of United States citizenship as well as Israeli citizenship, who is known to say, never let a good crisis come to waste. Go to waste, basically. So the idea is that if there is a crisis, you can do certain things you would not be able to do if there was not a crisis. So the idea is that situations need to break down situations have to break down in order for you to gain some degree of control. So to some extent, in all of these Souls games, at least except Demon Souls, for whatever reason, you sort of, or at least most people, are presented with the option to basically let chaos or regression take over completely. Or if it is not that, especially in the later Dark Souls and Elden Ring, you have the option to create a great deal of chaos. And the idea behind that is that if you break things down, you will be able to establish your own order, which you can justify as being for the good of all. Oh, I know that we are ruining the lives of so many people, but it is for the greater good, and this will be good for everyone. So that is the idea. So, you can think what you want about that. Demon Souls was a bit different because, basically the only evil ending you could really pick, I suppose, was, siding with Freke. But, I do plan to talk more about Demon Souls. So, this has been a very interesting, podcast to have. Just me talking about some thoughts I have about all of this. Oh, goodness. You can kill the Maiden in Black, of course. Well, there you go. Well, that was just, that was a whole playthrough that this guy did. I will be planning to do more Demon Souls podcasts, eventually. This was kind of different. A change from my usual Elden Ring podcasts. But, as I said, the idea that is presented in just about every game is this sort of relation between order and chaos, and sort of the risks or sort of potential advantages of letting everything go to chaos, or even just establishing order. And the idea is that basically, the stability of the order sort of wears down over time, and so the order needs to be destroyed. And these are very, what you may call Machiavellian ideas that are often presented in these games. But I think Demon Souls was a good deal more nuanced. There were a lot of things in Demon Souls that you did not see in a lot of the other Souls games that I thought were quite interesting. Right? So, people, this is the first of my Demon Souls podcasts, and I may be doing more. It was quite enjoyable. So, God be with ye. Alright.